Labor Talks was John DeRozier, recorded at Chippewa Valley Community Television in Eau Claire, Wisconsin.
Hello, my name is John DeRozier and welcome to Labor Talks. Here we talk about issues that are related to working families, unions, and labor. We also talk about issues that, sometimes we get serious and sometimes we're a little bit lighthearted. And on that note, I want to introduce Representative Dana Wachs. He represents the 91st Assembly District. And Dana, welcome to Labor Talks.
Oh, thanks for having me, John.
Okay.
I appreciate being here very much.
And how much of last night's game did you get to watch? I know you got to see part of it, but...
Well, I had to give a speech over in Wisconsin Rapids last night, so I missed the first half, and I missed Julius Peppers intercepting and running the distance. I'm cautiously optimistic and hopeful that I'll be able to see some tape of that, but I missed that part. I did hear it on the radio.
Well, don't miss the next game.
No, I won't.
You got to hear it right on television, okay? I do have a few questions I'd like to ask if I may. And let's start out with, tell us a bit about yourself and why you first got into politics.
Well, I got into politics, I grew up in a kind of a public family. My father was the city manager here, and so there really wasn't a time at all in my life that we weren't in some aspects of public service as a family. But I was 9 years old one morning, and on a Saturday morning, and my mother came into the living room and she asked, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said, I'm 9 years old, I'm watching cartoons, it's a Saturday morning. And the next thing I knew, she said, "Oh no," what I got for lipping off like that is she said, "Oh no, you're going down to the Democratic Party headquarters and you're going to lick stamps for Hubert Humphrey." And and I've really been involved behind the scenes ever since then. Prior to going to law school, I ran 5 legislative campaigns for the Democratic Party. I worked for Senator Ted Kennedy for 7 months on his campaign staff, and I also helped Paul Offner run for Congress in the 3rd Congressional District. Had we won that congressional race, I suspect I would have gone to law school in Washington, D.C., but we didn't win it. I went to law school, and I've been practicing law here for 29 years. But throughout that 29 years, pretty much every election I've been involved with the Democratic Party, except when the kids are real little. Every year I've been involved. I've never not been involved, pretty much.
What has inspired you to stay in politics?
Well, I never intended to hold political office, but I got involved with the city council. I felt strongly about some issues and couldn't really help myself but to get involved. I had no intention of running for the legislature. Scott Walker, however, taught us that, some of us that normally aren't the candidates need to stand up and do the right thing and stand up for our beliefs, and that really led me to the legislature. I still practice law as well, but you know, it was time for different people to get in and do what they can to try to deal with what was going on in Madison.
Now, we both know that you could get elected without labor support. That's a fact. We can't deny it. Why do you support labor?
Well, I think labor is really central to Wisconsin's economy and, frankly, the national economy. If you take a look at economic studies that are in vogue right now, Piketty's studies, Robert Reich's studies, what you need for a vibrant economy is a strong middle class. That is really important if you want to have an economy that works. Trickle-down economics has never worked. If it did, you could go back to the Egyptians and say they should have had a wonderful economy because there were really rich people at the top of that economy, but they didn't. They had a slave economy, and it wasn't a very successful economy in the long run. If you want a successful economy, if you want a robust economy, you need to empower the middle class. You need to make sure that the middle class has the wherewithal to buy products. Otherwise, you're not going to have a vibrant economy. And really, The only way to make sure that there's sufficient buying power within the middle class is with labor unions. You look at countries like Germany, where there's a very strong labor union presence. They have the best economy on the planet Earth per capita, I think, without any question. They're in the very top echelon of economies. And why is that? It's because their middle class has the ability to buy the products. We got to face it. Trickle-down economics doesn't work. The top people on the top of the economic pyramid, they're not the job creators. The job creators are the middle class. How many refrigerators does a billionaire own? Well, maybe 5 or 6 for 5 or 6 different houses or apartments or whatever. But if you give money or you get money into the pockets of people in the middle class, they're going to buy the products. That's when you're going to build a factory. You're not going to build a factory until there's demand for a product. And so if you want to create jobs, if you want to have a vibrant economy, you got to empower the middle class. Functionally, the only way to do that is to make sure members of the middle class are able to organize and represent themselves in business negotiations. If you don't do that, then people will get real myopic and take short-term profits over the long-term health of the society. So I think the bottom line is the middle class wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for labor unions. Bottom line is we won't have a vibrant economy unless there is a stronger organizational background.
Could you explain how Act 10 has hurt the unions?
Well, I think Act 10, what it's done is well, first of all, it functionally attacks the members of the unions. You ask teachers today what kind of respect that they have, that they're getting from their employers, and it's diminished quite a bit by the fact that they're unable to organize as they once had. You can ask any of the unions that are affected by Act 10 how it's worked for them. They are having to pay a great deal more in terms of their benefit packages, and over time you're going to find that they're going to get less and less in terms of wage increases. There's no question about it. So I think there's been a dramatic effect on each individual member of these unions. They're not treated with the same respect they used to be, and they're not, they're not able to help themselves in terms of negotiations. So I think it's hamstrung the ability to negotiate. I think it's hamstrung the ability for the unions to exist in and of themselves because the union dues and the like aren't taken out as they had been at one point.
Mm-hmm. We've heard an awful lot about right-to-work legislation and how right-to-work legislation supposedly helps the employees. Could you please tell us how right-to-work legislation really works, and have you heard anything about right-to-work legislation being proposed in Madison?
Well, right-to-work really is nothing more than an attack on public unions, and what it really functionally will do is it'll drive down the ability of unions in general to organize in the private sector. So I think, yes, we've been hearing rumors in the Capitol that legislation is coming along. I believe that the governor has already indicated that he would support this kind of legislation. So, and what that will do is further drive down the ability of people to organize, and that will just do nothing more than perpetuate the economic system that isn't working. Again, if trickle-down economics worked, Wisconsin should be the poster child for a vibrant economy. It obviously doesn't work since we're 46 in terms of job growth and economic growth. We've become a trickle-down economy. We are the incubator that demonstrates that it doesn't work. And in order to combat that, we need to make sure that there's ability to organize. And they just really don't want to have human beings represented in the Capitol building. They would rather have massive corporations represented. People need to be able to work together and organize together in order to effectively bring their message to Madison.
Who really benefits from right-to-work legislation?
Oh, it's just clearly the top of the economic pyramid is the only benefactor of that. If they can divide people, they're able to make sure that they pay them less than they would if people can work together.
Would you say that the Koch brothers definitely would benefit from right-to-work?
Well, I'm sure they would. Yeah, I mean it's the top, very top of the economic pyramid. Those are the folks that will benefit, and you know, it's a little frightening. Used to be that wealthy people in our society would try to do their best to make sure that things are working in society. Used to be that the likes of Carnegie and Rockefellers, while they would be very wealthy, and Henry Ford, they would also try to pay their workers enough because they seem to understand, now there's some exceptions to this, but they seem to understand that the more people in the middle class have money, the better their business operates as well. And Robert Reich speaks to that pretty regularly. It used to be wealthy people would often have their way in Congress and often have their way in the legislatures because they have the ability to lobby and they have the ability to to talk to their legislators more effectively than others. But they would also do things like buy libraries for people. Yes. They would also do things like buy massive parks in the West and and donate that to the people. But that's kind of not where they're at these days. It seems to be a zealous quest to try to accumulate wealth at the expense of everybody else. And that's what they would like to perpetuate that. The way to get around that is to make sure that people are able to organize, in my opinion.
Other than Act 10, can you think of any other anti-union legislation passed by Governor Walker and his legislative allies?
Well, there are pieces of legislation that have passed through that building that have really kind of draconian effects on workers. For instance, there was an asbestos bill that was recently passed to make it very difficult for people who've been injured in the workplace to bring a lawsuit against manufacturers of a very dangerous product called asbestos. People who work in asbestos-laden businesses like industrial plumbing, like brake replacement on trucks and vehicles, are often exposed to asbestos. And unfortunately what happens is people get asbestosis or mesothelioma. Generally those are fatal illnesses, and they have passed legislation to make it very difficult for people to bring lawsuits against asbestos manufacturers. So what's happening is that's just one of many examples of bills that have been passed that attack the worker. It doesn't attack the union in and of itself, but it attacks the workers and the work environment. So it's kind of a collateral around the bend attack on labor unions, etc.
If memory serves me right, this also has a negative effect on veterans as well. Isn't that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that you find that generally there's about 8% of the general population in the United States have served in the military. It's around 8 or 9%. But if you take a look at the numbers of lawsuits that are filed dealing with asbestosis or mesothelioma, asbestos-related injuries, it's about 40% of the lawsuits that are filed are members of the military that are filing it, former members of the military. The reason that that's happening is that when folks are living on ships or in submarines, they're surrounded by pipes and various gear that's covered with asbestos. So they're literally living in asbestos environments when they're working on brakes for tanks or airplanes. The landing gear brakes. That's covered with asbestos, and so they're getting exposed while they're in the service. Then after they leave the service, they've been trained, and a lot of those folks have been trained in industries like that. Their training would apply to plumbing, their training would apply to boiler making, things of that nature. So they come out and they continue in the same type of employment that they had been trained in the military, and they're constantly being exposed to asbestos. So they're in terms of percentage, there's a much higher percentage of people that are former military folks that are being affected by that.
Yeah, just a personal comment. I retired out of the Navy Reserves after 21 years. I was a hospital corpsman. I could not agree more with you because I've seen the damage that's been done. So I thank you for your support as far as the veterans and the anti-asbestos bill. I really do.
Yeah, they passed this bill, and it's a really complicated bill. I've introduced legislation that will correct some of the draconian measures that were in that original bill that was passed to try to fix that. At this point, we've not gotten a lot of support for that bill, but I'm optimistic and hopeful that in the next session we can get the repair bill passed.
I understand that some veterans groups have strongly opposed this bill as well.
Well, there's some veterans groups that are supporting my repair bill.
That's exactly
in terms of the original bill. I'm not sure I can say all veterans groups, but virtually all the groups opposed Governor Walker and the Republicans when they introduced that first bill that went ahead and got passed anyway. And many of those groups are supporting my repair bill to try to fix the damage that was done. It's really just flat out not fair that this bill was introduced in the first place.
One last question.
Sure.
It's been said that the budget repair bill was passed to bring Wisconsin's deficit under control. Come on, did it?
Well, something that people
so,
don't understand often is that we are constitutionally mandated in the legislature to have a balanced budget every single session. In every single session, there have been balanced budgets. Every session. It's constitutionally mandated. Did this bill, did it in and of itself do anything meaningful in terms of the deficit? If it did, it was that the cost was way too high in terms of what it did to the humans that are affected by this. Out of the blue, and if you don't mind, I can go into this a little bit. Out of the blue, what happened is that all sorts of folks had a bomb dropped on them, and what that bomb was is that they're going to have an unanticipated economic hole in their family budget for health care costs and the like. People couldn't plan for it, so suddenly out of nowhere, there's an unanticipated hole in their budget. Now, in some respects, that could have been helpful for the state budget process in and of itself. But what this governor did is basically give a rebate or kind of a tax rebate, which was really not meaningful in terms of what it did for each and every family. But what it did is create an even worse budget situation than we had in the first place. I mean, so whatever benefits were, obtained, which it's very arguable that there weren't any, because what it really economically did, have been marched back. So perhaps somebody could argue that there were 2 steps taken forward, but functionally, I think everyone agrees that whatever steps were taken forward were backed off, with really undisciplined approach by this governor. The thing that you got to remember, and I got into a kind of debate a little bit with one of the governor's economists about 6-7 months ago in a kind of a forum where they put charts up. This is a PhD economist. He puts charts up that shows that they couldn't quite figure out why we're recovering so slowly from the present recession. And they overlaid recoveries from other recessions that we've had over the years. And if you look, the recovery from other recessions, went up a lot quicker. And if you look at this recession, the recovery, there's kind of a slow bump and then a flattening and then a slow rise again. And I asked the question during that forum, I asked this economist, doesn't that directly correlate with Act 10? And he didn't deny that it did. He said, and I challenged him about, Minnesota's not having this problem. They didn't have this kind of an approach to the budget. And he said, well, that's true. In the long run, we'll find out, and we believe in the long run it's better the way we did it. But in the short term, what Minnesota did by not having this kind of an attack on public worker unions, he thinks that in the long run, Wisconsin will be better off for what they did. But the truth of the matter, again, is what did we do to the middle class with that Act 10? We hurt the middle class. We handed each family $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 of unanticipated economic loss. Now, that doesn't make you want to run out and buy a new refrigerator if you're in the middle class and all of a sudden you've got this problem. You're going to not buy, you're going to not participate in the economy like you would had you not had that unanticipated loss. So I think it was very harmful for our economy what was done with Act 10 and the budget. I think it was exceedingly harmful for our economy, in my opinion, because, again, it landed blows to the middle class where we need to be helping the middle class, not basically enacting a shock and awe strategy against them. So
I could sit here and listen to you all day long. I really could, because I like what you're saying. And I also strongly agree with what you're saying. But do you have anything you want to add? We need to wrap this up. I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate being invited to talk today about these issues. I think there's goodwill on both sides. I don't think anybody has any evil intent. I don't think the Republicans are trying to do harm. It's just that we have a difference of opinion on economic philosophies. And I'm convinced that if you want a vibrant economy, you should focus on building up the middle class and building up the poor as well. Things like increasing the minimum wage brings additional economic wherewithal to folks that don't have it now. And once you do, they will buy products. They need products. They just can't afford them now. So we have an honest difference of opinion. I think we're right, and I think the economic studies are demonstrating that we are. Krugman, Robert Reich, Piketty, these studies are showing that I think our approach in the long run and in the short run is the better approach.
Now, I know I said I wasn't going to ask any more questions, but I got to ask. Do Walker and his allies honestly believe that what they're doing is helping Wisconsin and the taxpayers? Do they honestly believe that?
I don't know. I can't really speak for what they honestly believe, but there seems to be a pretty strong correlation between some of the decisions that are being made and where they're getting campaign contributions. And I think we've talked about this. I'm not sure where we're at in terms of time here, but when I first got elected, I went through and looked very closely at the iron mining bill, and within a short period of time, minutes, I found a loophole that's in that bill that clearly allows iron companies to drain flowages and mine flowage or lake beds. Strangely, nobody'd found that before, and I looked at it, and then I asked my wife, Beverly Wickstrom, to look at it. She's also an attorney. I'm an attorney by profession. And I took my research down to the Ledge Council in Madison, and they found that indeed there was a loophole that was left in that bill, which would allow that. Now, this is a long story, but the point is that bill was drafted by corporations. Those corporations knew what was in it more than our legislature did. And there's only one reason that bill was allowed to get passed. It appears that there was about $700,000 of campaign contribution. If you make policy decisions based on what campaign contributions there are, I think that leads to trouble, particularly if you don't read the bills as they come through. And so, it's a pretty concerning situation in that regard.
You mentioned the iron companies. What about the sand mine companies? And that, I promise you, is my last question.
Yeah, in what sense? What about the sand mining companies?
Well, it seems to me that there's a lot of frack mining going on, and that
absolutely.
And that seems to be. It doesn't seem to be. It is hurting the environment.
Oh, well, and what's interesting is that there seems to be a concerted effort to take away local control from local municipal government and county government. Police powers are being infringed upon in favor of an industry again, and I think that's a dangerous precedent. You cannot make functionally good or sound policy decisions based on how much somebody's contributing to you, and in some respects there's an appearance that that's what's going on. There's certainly a correlation. And that's very concerning, because I mean, if a good example of what happens if you allow that to be the case is take a look at the IRS code. The IRS code is the most tampered with code that's ever existed, I'm sure. If you start with the Codex of Hammurabi from the Mycenaean age, and you go through now, there's probably never been a piece of legislation that's had so many attachments for special interest than that. You can't make hide or hair tail out of that code. And that's because of special interest groups. Everybody comes in and they want a special little thing put in the code to take care of their own interest. Well, the problem with that is if you do that, there's no policy. It's just a big ball of yarn. It's nothing but a bird's nest, and that's what will happen in the long run with Wisconsin statutes and our tax codes if we continue to allow special interest groups to have their way, in my opinion. It's a kind of a dangerous precedent, and we need to get through that. We need to make sure that people are being represented in Madison. I think the only way to do that is through stronger labor voices being heard in Madison. Act 10, it takes voices away from the middle class. It takes lobbying power away from the middle class, and I think that's not healthy.
I just have one final comment, and I know Representative Walks. He does a great job for us in Madison. He is the one legislator that I know who sends us press releases, honest, objective press releases about what is happening in Madison. And when I say what is happening, for example, the bills that he has fought against, the bills that have been promoted by Walker and his allies. And without Dana Walks, I don't think he keeps us in touch. He really does. And people need to really pay attention to Dana Walks. he's worth listening to. And I thank you, sir, for
Well,
your
thank
time.
you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Chippewa Valley Community Television is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, you can contact us by calling 715-839-5067 or on the web at www.cbctv.org.